Welcome to the iLearn Virtual Campus. Please sign up for a free iLearn membership on our website, check out our 7th annual conference coming next spring 2021, and let us know if you're interested in hosting events or leasing space on our campus by emailing campus@immersivelrn.org.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, let's begin. No? Can you hear me? Okay, so we are good to go. Hello, everyone. Welcome for the next session, the next technical session. I have the pleasure to invite my colleague, Professor Alexander Plovsky, to guide this session. So enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Francisco. Although it's a little bit too early to call me professor, I'm just a postdoc here at the HCI lab in Otago. And I welcome everyone to our session 13 on presence and embodiment. We have 5 very interesting talks for you today. And the first talk will be by Diane Deves. on studying the interrelation between locomotion techniques and embodiment in virtual reality. Diane is a PhD student at the INRIA in France, and this paper was written by her and her colleagues from INRIA.
I'm pleased to present my paper called Studying the Interrelation between Locomotion Techniques and Embodiment in Virtual Reality. This paper focuses on two widely studied challenges in VR. First one is locomotion, so how a user can move in a virtual environment. There are many locomotion techniques that can be classified into four categories. Row scale-based techniques, for example, wave walking, motion-based techniques, for example, walking in place, control-based techniques, so all types of steering techniques, and finally, teleportation. First three categories imply continuous movement in a virtual environment, contrary to teleportation, which is instantaneous. There are many studies investigating locomotion techniques, considering the available space or usability, but they rarely give the user a virtual body. But virtual bodies, avatars, are increasingly used in VR, especially in collaborative applications, and there are many studies on what we call embodiment. So the sense of feeling like the avatar is our real body, which can be decomposed into three subcomponents: ownership, agency, and self-location. So there are many studies on these two domains, but not a lot of work combining these two domains together. So we lack of understanding on the interrelation between these two domains. Especially, so what kind of feedback should we give to a user who is using this kind of techniques? So techniques with low fidelity, so not close to the real life. So we don't know how locomotion can potentially impact embodiment, and how having an avatar can potentially impact how the user navigates. There are some studies on embodiment using navigation tasks. I won't present them. There are also studies investigating the influence of embodying an avatar on navigation tasks. For example, it was found that having a virtual body can improve performance in the stepping stone task. Also, can decrease collisions with the virtual environment. But there are lots of studies on locomotion and avatars. There is one, for example, by Emilios et al. Investigating the impact of perspective, so first or third person perspective, and the avatar appearance on performance in several navigation tasks, and also on embodiment. To our knowledge, there are no studies investigating different locomotion techniques, because in this study, for example, it was real walking that was used, but how about low fidelity techniques? So we conducted an experiment investigating two research questions. The first, does the locomotion technique influence the sense of embodiment? And does embodying an avatar impact the user's preference and performance depending on the technique used? In our experiment, we had two factors. The first one, between subjects factor, the locomotion technique. We used three different locomotion techniques: rear walking, walking in place, and head steering. So they all imply a continuous movement, and they offer a different level of interaction, fidelity, and physical movements. We also had a within subjects factor, the avatar appearance. We had two levels. The first, the no avatar condition, so only the 3D controllers were displayed, and a full body avatar condition. And in this condition, as we can see in this video, the movements done by the avatar are the movements done by the user. So here we complete the steering condition because the legs of the avatar are not moving. We had two hypotheses. So first, that the sense of embodiment would be higher for high fidelity techniques. So it would be the highest with rear walking. and that the presence of an avatar would lead to less collisions with the virtual environment, independently of the technique. For this experiment, we had an 8 by 8 meters area, and in the virtual environment, there were virtual fences delimiting the available navigation space. Participants were represented by gender-matched avatars, which were animated thanks to Inverse Kinematics and the plugin Finalike. Track the head, we used an HTC Vive Pro. For the hands, Vive controllers, and we also use 5 trackers to track the feet and the shoulders to measure number of collisions with the virtual environment. So I will explain just after. So in this experiment, the real challenge is to ensure that the participant sees his virtual body. So we used 4 different tasks. The first one was a training task to get used to the environment and to the locomotion technique. So the participants had to pick mushrooms on the ground. Then we had 3 main tasks, all involving different focus on different body parts. So the first one was the corridor task. Participants had to walk back and forth in the corridor with mirrors at both ends. So in this task, they could indirectly see the virtual body in the mirror. Then we had a path following task. In this task, participants had to look at target moving on an H-shaped trajectory. So in this task, the focus was on the legs. People could see their legs. And as a performance measure, we used the mean distance to the line. Finally, we had the columns task. So people still had to pick mushrooms on the ground, but this time we added columns to measure the number of collisions with these columns. In this task, people could mostly see their arms. In this experiment, we used subjective questionnaires. So first, an embodiment questionnaire based on the one proposed by Gonzalez, Franco, and Peck, measuring the senses of ownership, agency, and self-location. We also had other questions about the virtual representation, if it was logical or pleasing, the ease of tasks, and also at the end of the experiment, the preference between the 2 appearance conditions. To start, we had 3 groups. We had 20 participants per group. All participants only used 1 technique and did the 4 tasks twice, once with no avatar and once with a full body avatar. This condition was counterbalanced. And also the embodiment questionnaire was administered only after the block with the full body avatar. So we found similar levels of embodiment with all the locomotion techniques. So H1 is not supported. And this is an interesting result. A potential explanation is that in all conditions, people had a full control of the avatar. The avatar was moving according to their own movements. And there are studies showing the importance of control in the sense of embodiment. So maybe this aspect is more important in the sense of embodiment, but the level of fidelity of the technique. Also, some participants noticed some artifacts in the legs animation, so especially in the walking and walking in place conditions. So it would be interesting to replicate this study using motion capture, for example, to measure the impact of such artifacts on the sense of embodiment. Also, we did not find a significant difference on the number of collisions with or without an avatar. So this is surprising considering the literature. This may be due to the type of obstacles. As we can see in the picture, the columns were quite far from one another, so maybe the participants did not need a body reference to avoid the columns. We also had a question about preference between the 2 conditions. So it was scored on a 1 to 7 Likert scale, 1 being a preference for the no avatar condition, and 7 a preference for the full body condition. So we noticed a slight preference for the condition with an avatar for all techniques because the scores are globally above 4. But for the steering condition, you can notice that the scores are more polarized, with people highly preferring the condition with an avatar or without an avatar. So this preference of having an avatar or not seems to depend on the locomotion technique used. As future work, it would be interesting to investigate different locomotion techniques, for example, teleportation, because here we used only continuous techniques. Also, we could investigate the influence of visual feedback on virtual embodiment. Some studies started to investigate the feedback during walking in place. Should we display an avatar stepping on the spot, like the user, or an animation of the avatar walking? So in this experiment, we explored the interrelation between locomotion techniques, so 3 locomotion techniques, and embodiment. And this study suggests that the locomotion technique has a low impact on the sense of embodiment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you again, Diana. Everyone, you can use the F4 button to give her a round of applause. And now we are coming to the questions. As there are no questions in VOVA, I want to quickly ask, does anybody have a question in the audience? You can raise your hand. Okay, doesn't seem to be any questions right now. My question for you, Diana, would be, so from your observations, as people did not necessarily perceive a big difference between an animated and a non-animated avatar, would you say that we should use this kind of like just render any avatar at the user's location for VR applications that aim for enjoyment, and render no avatar for applications that focus on tasks such as training?
Yes, it's sure that the use of avatars depend on the application. For enjoyment, I think people enjoy having a full body and being able to move it, for example, in social applications. But yes, for training, considering the current tracking techniques, yeah, maybe it's better for the moment to use simple representations like virtual hands or only the controllers, because yeah, there are still some tracking problems, and maybe for some people it's more hindering to have an avatar than just having some a simpler representation.
Thank you, Diana. Okay, one more check if anybody has any questions. I don't see anything in VOVA either. Let's then thank Diana again and move on to the next presentation. Our next presenter will be Dr. Eric Wolf. I assume he is doctor. Please correct, excuse me if I'm wrong. He will be giving his talk on his research assistant at the Julius Maximilians University of Würzburg, and he will be giving a presentation on the paper Body Weight Perception of Females Using Photorealistic Avatars in Virtual and Augmented Reality, which was written by him and his colleagues Nina Döllinger, David Mahl, Karin Wienerich, Mario Botsch, and Marc-Erich Lataschek. If you have any questions for Eric, please post them in VOVA so we can easily share them with everybody.
Hi, my name is Eric Wolf. I'm from the University of Würzburg, and I will present you today paper Body Weight Perception of Females Using Photorealistic Avatars in Virtual and Augmented Reality. Body weight misperception is a known problem in body weight disorders. For example, people suffering from obesity tend to underestimate their body weight, whereas people suffering from anorexia tend to overestimate it. The idea is to support the therapy of body weight misperception disorders by mixed reality, for example, by changing the perception and the behavior of the user by the use of embodied avatar. This is called the program. table here shows the latest research on body weight perception, system properties of the systems that we. What we also can see is that researchers use different displays with different degrees of immersion. However, body weight perception could be influenced by the degree of immersion, for example, due to the distance compression effect. Based on the research we see here, no conclusion is possible how body weight perception could be influenced by system immersion. So for our research project, we are asking ourselves which display should be used for further research. Therefore, we considered two different display types, AR see-through HMD and a virtual reality HMD, here our research. Based on this, we created our research question, which is, does body weight perception of avatars differ between a lower immersive AR see-through HMD and a higher immersive virtual reality HMD? Picture, we can see the system architecture of the system, which we use to investigate our research question. Left side, you can see the user's input. On the right side, you can see the generated output. Use the 6-point tracking using the HTTP Vive, 2-controller and 3-tracker. Capture the pose of the participant. Transforms where have the tracking component where we calibrated it to the joints. The joints are then passed to the embodiment component where we generate the body pose by an inverse kinematics approach. Generated pose is then passed to the avatar component where we retarget the pose into an avatar. As avatar, we used a photorealistic non-personalized avatar always scaled to the user's body height. The avatar was generated from a model from which we knew the body weight and the body height, and from which we could calculate the body mass in the avatar. Generated avatar is then merged in the environment component with the virtual environment, and we also put a virtual mirror into the scene. At the end, we have an output on the augmented reality display and on the virtual reality display. We use the system to conduct an experiment to explore the differences between the systems. In total, we tested 58 female participants, which were aged between 18 and 9, and which had normal vision and hearing. The German speaker had no known sensitivity to simulator sickness and no mental disorder, including body weight disorder. For our experiment, we measured presence by the use of one question during immersion and by the IPQ. Presence, we expected that participants using the virtual reality display will perceive a higher presence than participants using. For embodiment, we captured virtual body ownership and agency, each by one question during immersion. We also captured it by the virtual embodiment question. Here, we expected participants in the virtual reality display conditions higher virtual body ownership than participants using the augmented reality. For agency, we expected participants to feel a similar level of agency in both conditions. Last measurements, we captured body weight perception. Body weight perception was captured by body weight misestimation, which was calculated by the estimated body weight compared to the body weight of the avatar the participants were facing. Here, we expected that participants in both conditions will underestimate the body weight of the avatar, and that the misestimation will be dependent on body mass. The experiment was conducted according to a controlled procedure. First, participants got information about the experiment, gave consent, then they filled in a graphic questionnaire. We used 3 measurements to control between conditions, which were simulator sickness, self-esteem, body shape concerns. Afterwards, posed either to the augmented reality display or to the virtual reality subject design. The exposure phase I will explain shortly in a video. So we will continue with the post-immersion, where participants filled in the post-questionnaires for embodiment and presence, also did another simulator sickness questionnaire, and the body measurements were captured. Here now shows participants the augmented reality condition. First, the system was calibrated by using a T-pose. Then the participants had to perform different tasks. In total, we used 5 simple movements. Tasks were used to induce the feeling of embodiment for see that people always were looking between the mirror and the end of the experiments with the 3 questions I mentioned before, and also participants had to estimate the body weight of the avatar, which you can see. I also have a video of the other condition, which was the virtual reality head mount. Here you can see that the virtual environment was looking different, was rendered, but it was looking similar as the real environment, which you can have seen. Let's have a look to our results. Presence, we could not confirm our hypothesis that participants in the virtual reality condition will perceive a higher presence, as we could not find a significant difference in presence between the conditions for both measurements. However, for the IPQ, we could find significant difference in spatial presence and in the involvement. Embodiment, we could not confirm our hypothesis regarding virtual body ownership, as we couldn't find a significant difference between conditions. Could confirm our hypothesis for agency, as we also couldn't find a significant difference in agency. Body weight perception, here we can state that there was no significant difference body weight perception between the conditions, but we had an underestimation of the body weight in both conditions. However, what we have to say to this results is found out that body weight misestimation were predicted by the participant's body mass index. That was significant as well. So the lower the body mass index of a participant, the higher the underestimation of the avatar, and the higher the body mass index of a participant, the higher here we can say body weight estimation depends significantly on the participant's body mass index, but we couldn't find significant differences between the conditions predictions. With regard to our research question, say that we couldn't find a significant difference in body weight perception between our systems. However, we also cannot rule out an influence of immersion when having a larger difference in immersion. We also can say that body weight perception of non-personalized embodied avatars significantly mass index in both conditions. Of course, our experiments had also some limitations. We really had a low difference in immersion between our systems, and therefore we also couldn't find a large difference in presence, or just a partial significant difference in presence. So we couldn't generate insights on the influence of presence and also of embodiment on body weight perception. We also only performed one body weight estimation per person. To address these limitations, future work should use systems with additional degrees of immersion, for example, an optical see-through HMD. Future work should also investigate the influence of presence and embodiment on body weight perception, and could use a more realistic task scaling and modification approach. By using this, for example, we could perform multiple estimations per participant on the change the body weight. At the end, I would like to say thank you to the German BMBF for supporting our project. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me in the dedicated section.
Thank you very much, Eric. Let's give him a round of applause. We have one question on VOVA, which is very interesting. Thank you. Do you think if participants see themselves from the third-person perspective, would it make a difference?
So thank you for the question. It's a really interesting question. So I guess you're talking about the real participant's view and not about the avatar, because people could see themselves in the mirror, obviously, or could see the avatar in the mirror. It's a good question. If this would have affected the results, I guess we could have seen a similar effect as we could have seen in our experiment, that the body mass index of the participants were moderating the nations.
So you think it would have had an effect, as far as I understand?
Yes.
Does anybody in the audience have a question? Doesn't seem like this, so I will also ask a question for me. The avatars that you used in your study were all based on the actor or volunteer that you had recruited beforehand. Do you think that if you had used a personalized avatar for each of your participants, would you have seen maybe different results, or do you think that you would have seen probably the same thing?
Thank you also for this question. It's also really interesting because there is actually already work which did a similar thing. First of all, to do this kind of estimations on avatars which are personalized, you have to change the body weight, because usually people are aware of their own body weight, so you can't just ask them how heavy they are because they usually know it. And when you have the opportunity to change the body weight of the avatar, then this is also something what already was done by Thaler. And they found that body weight estimations were also predicted by the body mass index of the participants. And this is actually a topic which we are currently investigating, whether these two effects we found, the one of embodiment and the one we can see from Thaler et al. Of personalization, if this adds together or if it's just still the same.
Thank you very much. So I don't see any more questions in the audience. Then let's thank Eric once more and go to the next talk. The next presentation will be by Arindam Dey from the University of Queensland, and he will be presenting the paper, A Neurophysiological Approach for Measuring Presence in Immersed Virtual Environments, which was written by him and his co-authors Jane Poon, Suadeep Saha, Chelsea Dobbins, and Mark Billinghurst.
Hello everyone, I'm Arindam Dey from the University of Queensland. Today I'm going to talk about our latest research where we have tried to measure presence using neurophysiological signals. This work was done by my students Jane and Shubhadeep, and in collaboration with my colleagues Chelsea and Mark. Presence is an important phenomenon in virtual reality, which is defined by the feeling of being there. Right, and being an important aspect of virtual reality, it has been studied very widely and over the years. However, the most common way of measuring presence so far has been using questionnaires. So people have to experience the virtual reality environment using whatever display device they are using, and then they have to come out of that VR environment to answer this questionnaire, which causes a break in presence, and there are some other issues that I'll discuss in a moment. Because it's an important aspect of virtual reality environments and been studied over the years, There have been 15 different presence questionnaires developed by the researchers. Last year, Quinn et al. Has provided a very comprehensive survey of these questionnaires. And what they found is the last 3 questionnaires are the most cited ones and most widely used in the VR field. In that same paper, Quinn et al. Have identified that when people answer questionnaires while being in the virtual environment versus coming out of the virtual environment, they have found that there is a difference in the way they respond. While it did not change their overall presence outcome, but it suddenly increased the consistency of the variance when they answered the questionnaire while being in VR. So it shows that working with these questionnaires can be a bit tricky at times, and how when you answer these questionnaires can have an effect on the outcome. Besides this kind of issues, over the years, scientists in mainly social science and other fields have identified various issues with questionnaires. First is the bias of the respondents, right? And then of course there are other issues of dishonesty, and what happens is when people come out of that VR environment, they may have forgotten exactly what they were feeling when they were experiencing the VR scene, and exactly how they felt when they were experiencing it. So their answers are relying on their memories, and that memory can at times be not so accurate. So there may be some error in their responses, and that's why one of the pioneers of presence research in virtual reality, Neil Slater, has said that the post-experience questionnaires cannot be heavily relied on. And this is something that has attracted our attention and has motivated us to think how we can measure presence in real time without having to rely on these questionnaires. Now, one way of measuring presence in real time could be something a bit implicit, right? So whatever experience we have in our life, somehow our neural activities and our physiological activities get affected by it. So we thought, is there a correlation, or is there a footprint of neurological and physiological signals in terms of presence in VR? Or investigate this further, we have designed a study. We created 2 different versions of the same environment, a calm environment where we have had a participant sitting on a cart, and the cart was going through a safari, right? And in the high presence environment, we created some higher visual quality. Our visual fidelity was higher, and they had their hands a bit more embodied and had a human-like skin tone, whereas in the low presence environment, their hand was detached and was of a white color. And in the high presence environment, we had opportunities to interact with the animals, where they can touch the animal and animal would react in response to that touch, whereas that option was not available in the low presence environment. Similarly, they could interact with the cart. They can stop and start the cart. And that was not possible in the low presence environment. In terms of sound, in high presence environment, we provided an ambient sound plus some object-based sound, where the animals were, and there are some other waterfalls. Whereas for the low presence environment, there are only ambient sound, right? And these factors were identified from the previous studies that we have seen, and of course with the pilot study that we have done. So design the study as a one-way between subject experiment, where 24 participants are divided into 2 groups of 12 participants each. In terms of dependent variables, we have collected neurophysiological signals, mainly EEG, heart rate, and electrodermal activity. And for the presence questionnaire, we have used the questionnaires designed by Slater, Usho, and Steed, and Whitmer and Singer. So we use both of these questionnaires to make sure that our designed environments have an effect on presence, and that effect is validated. So we had 4 hypotheses. The first hypothesis was we expected 2 environments will have a different level of presence when measured through these questionnaires. Then we, based on another earlier study, we have identified, we expected that the electrodermal activity will be different for higher presence environment than the lower presence environment. We have also identified, we also expected that heart rate will be increased in the high presence environment versus low presence one. And similarly, we expected the low presence environment will cause different brain activity than the high presence one, particularly in terms of visual stress and engagement. The results indicate that our first hypothesis was accepted. So for both of these questionnaires, SUS and Whitmer and Singer, we have found a significant difference in their subjective responses between these 2 questionnaires, as you can see in these graphs. In terms of heart rate, we have noticed that the high presence environment caused higher heart rate. Now, this effect was a bit interesting. It can be a reason, it can be caused by the higher level of interactivity available in the high presence environment, or it can also be caused by the higher presence at the field, or it can be a combination of both. So this is something we need to understand more and investigate further. In terms of brain signals, we have noticed that in the higher presence environment, there are more synchronization between the 2 hemispheres, particularly in the alpha band, as you can see in the graph. And our paper has more results and more details about this analysis. We have also noticed there are some significant differences between their neural activity and between these 2 environments. As you can see in this heat map, in the time frequency domain, in the high presence environment, which is the bottom graph, that it has more neural activity than the low presence one. We have also noticed that high presence environment causes higher theta and beta activities in the frontal region of the brain, which is linked to improved concentration and attention. Similarly, high presence causes less neural activity in the occipital region, which indicates that there are less visual stress involved in high presence environment. For the parietal region, we have noticed higher alpha activities, which shows lower stimulator sickness when the presence was higher. So overall, what we've identified through these studies is that there is a measurable neurophysiological effect of presence, and it varies between the two different level of presence. However, our study had a few limitations. First, our environment that we designed, it was a calm environment, and there are other environments possible in VR, and we haven't studied those. The EEG headset that we have used only had 14 channels. If we have used medical grade, more medical grade EEG devices with more channels, then we can probably identify more neural correlates of presence in VR. And to avoid any interference and motion artifacts, we asked participants to sit on a chair, and then while experiencing the VR environment, which caused some limitations because VR is not normally used that way. So all of these things we'll need to explore further, and how we can remove those limitations down the line. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Arinda. I don't see a, let's give him a round of applause. Yes. I don't see a question on Wova, but we have a question here in the public chat. Did you also consider the EDA and presence, since you mentioned it in your presentation?
Yes, we did measure EDA, but we did not find a significant effect on presence in terms of EDA. Right, so that's why, yeah, in the talk we didn't mention this, but yeah, but that's definitely something we need to consider more, because the environment that we had was quite calm, and probably did not arouse people as much in those while being in that environment. But if we have a scary environment or something that causes more anxiety, you may find some effect there as well. So this is one of the limitation in our work as we presented. It's mostly a calm environment, and there are many other environments where we might find some effects on EDA as well.
Thank you. I don't see any questions right now in the audience and or Vova. So a question again from me. Do you think that if you measured the same signals in augmented reality, where people are more engaged with the real world, do you think that you would see similar results based on the rendering quality?
Hard to tell. We haven't studied this, and the way these signals work, they can vary. We might see some similar results, but that can only be confirmed after we really do the study. But this approach can definitely be used.
There's a question from Johannes Schirm.
Okay, thanks very much for the talk. Very interesting topic. I was wondering if you so you're basing the presence effect on the subjective measures, if I had that correctly. So you say people subjectively felt they were more present, then you can correlate this to the different brain patterns. But I wondered if this didn't basically oppose the idea that you can't really rely on the subjective measures of presence.
That's a very good question. I think our idea going forward is to rely less on the subjective questionnaire, but at this stage we do not have any prior work that can say this kind of neurological or physiological signals refer to lower or higher presence. So we need to find that while we do this kind of research. So we use this type of questionnaires as a benchmark to start with, but as we go along and do more research and understand this space in terms of this kind of neurological physiological signals, perhaps we can then maybe studies in about a year or 2 years later, we can probably not to use these questionnaires. But at this stage, we do not have that understanding to base our assumptions on. So just to validate in the current status of state of the art that our presence environments that we created are causing that difference subjectively, to make sure the community understands that. So we use that. But you're right, going forward, we should not use them as much. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. That's a very interesting topic. And I also think it's a good direction to head into.
Okay, I don't think we have. There's one more question in the public chat, and I hope Arindam can answer it afterwards, because we unfortunately don't have any more time for that.
Sure.
Let's thank once again Professor Day, and move on to the next talk.
Thank you very much.
Our next presentation will be by Dr. Naval Kenak, here next to me from the Université Paris Sud, and she will be presenting the work she and her colleagues John Vezien and Patrick Bordeaux did on spatial presence, performance, and behavior between real, remote, and virtual immersive environments.
Hello, I am Noel Kenak, and I am happy to present you our spatial presence study between a real, remote, and virtual environments that was conducted in Université Paris-Saclay in France. Spatial presence refers to the user's ability to experience a sense of being physically located in any given environment. Namely, if the environment is real and non-mediated, the user experiences a proximal presence, also referred to as natural presence. If the environment is real but mediated, the user experiences a remote presence, better known as telepresence. And if the environment represents a non-existent computer-generated world, the user experiences a virtual spatial presence. While particular attention was given to assess spatial presence in real and virtual environments, none focused in measuring spatial presence in a remote situation. Yet, investigating spatial presence in such environment would allow assessing the influence of the existence of the physical representation behind the mediation system. The existence of the space means that actions in remote environments can induce real-life consequences in comparison to virtual environments where the action remains restricted to the non-existent computer-generated scene. That's why we conducted an experiment that evaluates the user's sense of spatial presence between a real physical space where users are physically located. A remote space represented the same physical space except that users are remotely located by means of a dedicated operation system, and a virtual representation that reproduces as faithfully as possible the physical space. By comparing between these three environments, we expected that the real environment would outperform both remote and virtual conditions in terms of spatial presence experience as well as user performance. In addition, we hypothesized that outcomes from the real environment would be closer to those from the remote one because of the existence of the space in both conditions. We designed a navigation task consisting of driving a wheelchair. More precisely, the participants of the experiment had to control the wheelchair to navigate in the space following a path route which was indicated by 7 numerous signs. In addition, obstacles were placed on the path that participants had to avoid. They consisted in pyramids of cans and chairs that you can see in the video. Obviously, the participants had to complete the task as fast as possible while remembering the location of the signs. In the real condition, participants experienced natural visual and sound stimulation. They were seated in the wheelchair and controlled it directly using an integrated joystick placed on its right arm. In the remote condition, visual capture was performed with a panoramic camera placed at the top of the wheelchair at eye level. The capture was then visualized in real time with an HTC Live Pro headset worn by participants. In addition, a first-order microphone placed at the top of the wheelchair was used to capture sound. This sound was then rendered binaurally over the HTC Vive headphones. To control the wheelchair remotely, the participants were seated in an armchair of the same side of the real wheelchair that was located in another area and equipped with a near-identical joystick placed at the same position. Thus, the wheelchair were remotely driven using a dedicated serial protocol implemented on the teleoperation computer to which the joystick was connected. In the virtual environment, we implemented a computer-generated scene, faithfully reproducing the space that was outputted to the same headset. The sounds were computer-generated based on prior audio recordings of the wheelchair while navigating in the physical space. It was then rendered binaurally over the HTC Vive headphones. In this condition, the wheelchair was virtual and implemented in Unity software using its built-in physics engine. The participants were seated in an armchair like in the remote condition and navigate into the computer-generated space using the joystick. 27 participants took part in the evaluation, with ages ranging from 21 to 40 years old. The only criteria to participate was to have a normal or corrected to normal vision and non-impaired hearing. The total duration to complete the evaluation was about 1 hour. During and after the evaluation, we collected different subjective and objective measures. Concerning the subjective measures, participants had to fill the Sdi Questionnaire, stands for Spatial Presence in Immersive Environments, which is a questionnaire that we developed in a previous study based on most used presence questions. The responses to this questionnaire yielded score for each of its 6 components, which are spatial presence, affordance, enjoyment, reality attributed to the environment, attention allocated to the task, and the negative factors cyber signals. Regarding objective measures, we register the number of correct recall signs from the memory test, the task completion time, and the number of obstacles collated. We also register two behavioral indicators, which were the minimum distance between the path and the obstacles called clearance distance, and the curvilinear abscissa around obstacles. In this part, I will present the most important results. For more detail, feel free to read our paper. Regarding the level of affordance, we found significant differences between each environment, with the best score attributed to the real environment as expected, by the worst scores attributed to the remote one, which does not support our hypothesis and which could be explained by the highest expectation of participants regarding the representation of their body in the remote conditions, as they did not have avatars. Regarding the reality scale, participants attributed the highest degree to the real environment and the lowest degree to the virtual one, supporting our hypothesis that the participant awareness of the existence of the space in the remote condition led them to assign a higher degree of reality compared to the pure virtual representation. As expected, spatial presence experienced by participants was higher in the real environment compared to both remote and virtual one. However, no difference was found between the remote and the virtual environments. This result may be explained by the positive influence of affordance on participants' sense of presence that was rated higher in the virtual environment. Concerning performance measures, results show that participants were the fastest in the real condition and the slowest in the remote one. The main reason is that they were careful not breaking anything when remotely navigate with the real wheelchair, being not confident with such a steer-operation system. The number of observed collisions was lower in both real and remote environments, highlighting that participants paid more attention not to collide with obstacles when the space was real, regardless of being physically or remotely located in this space. This assumption was supported by the clearance distance value that was highest in both real and remote environments compared to the virtual one, showing that participants were less prudent when the space was computer generating, being aware that their action would have no real consequences. We also investigated the correlation between the subjective responses to the questionnaire and the objective measures. Thus, a positive correlation was found between the subjective rating of spatial presence and performance. More precisely, the more the participants rated themselves as present in the environment, the more they remember the space, the less time they took to complete the task, and the fewer obstacles they collided. An interesting correlation was also found between the reality attributed to the environments and task completion time, the number of collisions, and clearance distance. Thus, the more the participants were aware of the reality of the space, the more they were careful, keeping more distance between them and the obstacles so as to avoid them. To summarize, we conducted a user study that compared the execution of a navigation task within a real physical space, a remote configuration, and a virtual representation. Our primary objective was to assess the sense of spatial presence. Many results indicated no difference in spatial presence between the remote and the virtual conditions, although a higher degree of affordance and enjoyment was attributed to the virtual environments and a higher degree of reality was attributed to the remote one. In addition, the behavioral outcomes in the real condition was closer to outcomes from the remote one than those obtained in the virtual condition as expected. Correlations also show the influence of the physical existence of the space in which participants operate on their performance and behavior. Yet, the study encounters some limitations. First, there was a visual delay in the remote condition due to the use of the panoramic camera, which could reduce the performance of participants. Secondly, participants were not wheelchair users, meaning that the novelty effect of using the electrical wheelchair in the real condition could bias the experience. It could be then interesting to run a second study with wheelchair users and compare the results. And finally, no avatar was provided in both remote and virtual conditions, which broke the fair comparison with the real condition, where participants' legs were visible. Therefore, next studies should integrate physical mannequins in remote conditions and virtual avatars in virtual conditions. Thank you for your attention and do not hesitate to ask questions. Hello, I am Noah.
Thank you. Now, everyone, let's thank you for the interesting talk. Okay. There are no questions in the over, so I'm asking to see if the audience here has any questions right now. No? Okay, then a question from me. In your experiment, you had several targets in the environment that users had to avoid and to go to. Do you think that the behavior of what you have observed and the results of your study would have been different if you had humans or humanoid models in the environment?
So in fact, it's in our plan to run a next study where we will use avatars, virtual or virtual real avatars, and this because we want to evaluate the social dimension in the environment. So to reply to your question, definitely yes. I think that if we add humans in the environment instead of objects, we will be able to evaluate the sense of social presence, which is the sense of being with other people, and which can highly influence the sense of spatial presence.
Okay. Do you think you would have also observed that their behavior, so by far they were avoiding the targets and the number of collisions could have been different if you had used a different objects in the environment?
There is some studies that exist about how we behave with other people. So I think that I'm not sure we find differences. I think that people try to avoid obstacles as well as trying to avoid humans.
Thank you. Once more, are there any questions in the audience? That doesn't seem to be the case. So let's thank Naval once more.
Thank you.
And we are moving on to our last talk of the day, which will be presented by Dr. Daniel Roth. And this work was done by him and his co-author Marc-Erich Latoschek on construction of the virtual embodiment questionnaire.
Hello, my name is Daniel. I'm from the Technical University of Munich, Chair for Computer-Aided Medical Procedures and Augmented Reality. And this work was done together with my former PhD advisor, Marc-Erich Latoschek of the University of Würzburg, and it considered the construction of the virtual embodiment questionnaire. A quick introduction about the backgrounds and motivation of this work. Virtual embodiment in general is important for many applications in which the user is represented to others, but of course also to themselves. For example, in therapy and rehabilitation, training and learning, collaboration, or especially social interaction. In the physical world, previous works identified three factors, or three major factors regarding embodiment. Self-location, which considers perceiving the self inside the body in an environment. Ownership or body ownership, which considers perceiving the body as the owner, source of all sensory sensations. And agency, which considers perceiving control over the body's actions and through that controlling the environment. With regard to virtual embodiment, previous works also found indications that such factors and components are present, such as, for example, virtual self-location, virtual body ownership, and agency. And the major question for us is how to measure virtual embodiment. It is important that we find more standardized ways to do so. that helps replicability of experiments and also comparability, of course. Some previous work investigated the measurement of embodiment and virtual embodiment. For example, Longo and colleagues with a typical rubber hand illusion experiment, and they performed a principal component analysis on their items and found 3 factors: ownership, agency, and location, in this case of the hand. Then Kalkert and Ersen tried to disassociate ownership and agency by assigning their items to 4 factors: ownership, ownership control, agency, and agency control. In 2017, we performed a literature review and collected a number of items or questions from the literature and performed a principal component analysis on these items as from the data of a study. And we found 3 factors: ownership, agency, and change in the perceived body schema, which is the basis of the present work. And in 2020, Gonzalez, Franco, and Beck underlined the request for a standardized questionnaire. They also collected a number of questions from previous lab experiments and assigned them to 6 factors: body ownership, agency, motor control, tactile sensations, location of the body, external appearance, response to external stimuli, and the total score. Next is the actual major contribution of this work, the scale construction. Some details may suffer from the limited timing. I refer to the paper to this regard. Based on the work from 2017, we generalized and extended our item pool, generalized in the sense that we tried to remove from formalizations of the virtual mirror and tried to remove phrasing that it was surrogative, and we extended the pool with questions that we thought were important to balance or may extend the different factors. We collected data on the basis of 3 studies, one that modified immersion. So in this study, we compared a projection scenario with the HMD scenario. One study that modified the personalization of the avatar, in which we compared a generic avatar to a personalized avatar that was personalized using a character generator, and one study in which we compared different levels of behavior realism, so for the body movement, face, and gaze, which were differently displayed. All factors or impacts from simulation properties that we thought were important for virtual embodiment, and in an additional validation study, which I will explain later on, we also modified latency and latency jitter. So this was the main procedure of the experiment. We asked participants some demographic questions and performed the calibration setup with the VR devices, and gave them some time to acclimatize before we exposed them to the task, which essentially consisted of performing different body movements and focusing their attention to different body parts on their avatar, as well as in the avatar in the mirror, to ensure more or less standardized exposure to the simulation and to the avatar. After these movements and focus points, we asked the dependent measures. Aside from the virtual embodiment questionnaire measures, we also asked related measures to investigate potential correlations. I refer to the paper for further details to that regard. With this data, we performed the confirmatory factor analysis, which you can see here. There were in total 196 participants where the data was included. And this is the result of the factor analysis. We found that 4 items for each factor loaded on the component. There was an iterative approach, but in general, the final model was stable. These were the final items of the confirmatory factor analysis: ownership, factor we found and confirmed consists of items such as I felt like the virtual body was my body, or I felt like the virtual body belonged to me. Agency consists of items such as the movements of the virtual body felt like they were my movements, or I felt like I was causing the movements of the virtual body. And the new component, which is very interesting to us, the perceived change in the own body schema, consists of items such as I felt like the form or appearance of my body had changed, or I felt like the width of my own body had changed. Next, I quickly go through the initial validation study we performed to further validate these found components. We basically followed the same procedure as before within subject experiment and introduced different levels of latency, a smaller level of additional latency, a larger level, and what you see here, latency jitter, that was adapted from the work from Staufert et al. And we kind of thought, obviously, that this was affecting the agency factor, but we wanted to find out especially how reliable our measurement is in this case. So on the left side, you see the method, the different levels of latency induced. In green, the baseline latency, which was 90 milliseconds. In yellow, the additional latency of about 100 milliseconds, which led to 207 milliseconds in total. Then in red, the large latency of 150 milliseconds in total. And in blue, the latency jitter. This was an exemplary frame measurement. And not surprising, we found that latency strongly affects agency, especially. But what was interesting in this result is that we could kind of pinpoint latency jitter somewhere in between the effects of 200 milliseconds latency and latency of 350 milliseconds. Of course, this depends on the spectrum of the jitter. And much more important for us, the reliability. In this case, we assessed it with Cohen-Bass alpha, range between 0.771 and 0.926 for the scale, which was relatively nice. To sum up and to conclude, we contribute the virtual embodiment questionnaire to assess embodiment factors, where the factors were body ownership, agency, and change. In contrast to previous work, this scale was rigorously developed and constructed through exploratory and confirmatory analysis and validated in an independent study, so database approach. And the scale can be applied to different scenarios, such as scenarios without mirrors. A bit of the implications of this work. We are especially interested in this change factor. We think while the relation between agency and ownership was also confirmed in previous studies, it's relatively interesting to consider this factor of perceived change in the body schema because it could be a predecessor of the Proteus effect by Yi and Berenson. So the question is, how realistic should avatars be, and would, for example, ownership contrast a perceived change and instead also contrast maybe the Proteus effect? So we are very interested in finding the relation between these different aspects. The questionnaire is available in German, English, French, Spanish, or Espanol, Korean, Japanese, and Chinese. At virtualembodiment.scale.com. The paper is available via open access at this TVCG link. And that I thank you very much for listening. And I hope you enjoyed the talk, and let me know if you have any further questions. Please feel free to contact us. Feel free to give feedback. We would be happily receiving feedback. Also, if you have results from this questionnaire applied.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Let's give him a round of applause. We have currently one question on VOVA from Eric Wolf, and he's asking, why did you refrain from adding items for a self-localization factor?
Yeah, it's a good question, and definitely we could think about extending the questionnaire. In the initial thought of this, we did not really specify for the factor self-location, simply because a lot of the aspects of self-location are related to disturbed images of the body or out-of-body experiences, discrepancies and disrupted body perceptions. So it's in our initial argumentation, it was not clearly transportable to virtual reality scenarios. Definitely, I mean, this could be further validated and extended to more factors. But the important point for us was that we have something that we can think that reliably captures these aspects.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? I don't see anything. Then a combined question from me, and I hope you can answer that. So the first part is, how do you think we could apply this questionnaire when we move from virtual reality more towards augmented reality? So let's say augmented virtuality with a couple more real parts, let's say with the real hand of the user or some real objects, but not completely the real environment.
That's also very interesting. I think this is something that we are concerned about in a lot of ways, also with regard to projection scenarios, for example. Example was shown by the work from Eric before, of course. But also if you think about applications such as Burn AR from Vaya and colleagues, Cristando and Ulrich in Arindam, there you would have an augmentation of the hand, and this could further lead to some change perception of embodiment, for example. And in my impression, this would be, for example, an application of this questionnaire.
Thank you. And a little, I would say, controversial question, but given that in the previous session we heard that there are potentially too many questionnaires out there, how do you see this additional questionnaire in this environment?
Well, I would partly agree. It's too many questionnaires, but maybe it's not about the mass of the questionnaires, but about the mass of the questionnaires that are really validated and constructed in a psychometrical sense. Because I think this partly also relates to the tutorials S1 is giving for a time now regarding the replication crisis and potential impacts for our community. And I think this is really a little problem that we have to be concerned about, especially coming up with questions, not assessing their reliability, not assessing their validity. I think this is a problem, and maybe it's not the question that we have too many questionnaires. Maybe we have too little validated questionnaires, so to say. And I welcome everyone to help. Also supporting this initiative and providing their data to us, maybe so that we can find further confirmation of these factors or add other factors and so on. I think it's a valid point that we have too many different measures, but the problem we raised here was mainly that we have not a validated assessment, and I think this is causing the problem rather than the diversity of measures.
Thank you, Daniel. I think some people in the audience are already strongly agreeing with your opinion on this. Let's thank once more all the speakers, and this is bringing us also to the end of this session. We will be going into a 30 minutes break, and after this we will be starting the next session. Second. ahead in 30 minutes on guidance in extended reality.
Welcome to the iLearn Virtual Campus. Please sign up for a free iLearn membership on our website, check out our 7th annual conference coming next spring 2021, and let us know if you're interested in hosting events or leasing space on our campus by emailing campus@immersivelrn.org.
To give some announcement. Okay?
Welcome to the iLearn Virtual Campus. Please sign up for a free iLearn membership on our website, check out our 7th annual conference coming next spring 2021, and let us know if you're interested in hosting events or leasing space on our campus by emailing campus@immersivelrn.org.